Hi, everybody. Welcome. Good afternoon, everybody, or I guess good morning if you're joining from British Columbia. Welcome to this DCS Global webinar. My name is Benjamin Scheinwald. I'm the president and CEO of BOMA Canada, and very proud to have been asked by Randy Burke and the team at DCS to moderate and host this webinar today. Thank you all for joining. I'm going to go in a moment to introduce today's four distinguished panelists, but just off the top, want to let you know that we have a few prepared topics to go through, but at the end, there will be a live Q&A process, and the chat is the venue where you can post your questions. So if a question occurs to you or something you want to put to the panel, feel free. It's open throughout the entire event. And you can put in your question there, and at the end we'll get as many of them to this group of panelists as possible. So we want to spend as much time as we can on the content today and less on the sort of process. And so without further ado, I'm going to go through the panelists and ask each of them if they could please just take a moment and introduce themselves to the audience. So Letitia, why don't you go first?
Absolutely. Firstly, I want to thank DCS for the opportunity today. I think this is a great panel and my panelists. My name is Letitia Paco. I'm COO, CFO at Epic Investment Services. And we're a North American asset, property management, and fund manager. And we manage about 18 billion in assets.
Thanks, Letitia. And of course, you and I were on a panel not too long ago when we had the pleasure of hosting you at the BOMEX Executive Roundtable. So thanks, good to see you again. Can't wait to see you in person one day. Matt Kornack, why don't you go next?
Yeah, so I'm Matt Kornack. I work in equity research at National Bank Financial, primarily covering TSX-listed public real estate investment trusts. Been in the job for 15 years, started in investment banking, but I'm going to bring a bit of a financial side perspective to the real estate world in this panel.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Elizabeth Schurz, next.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Randy, for the invitation. Thank you, Benjamin, for the hosting. I'm Elizabeth Schurz. I'm VP of Property Management with GWL Realty Advisors. I've been in the industry far too long. I'm not going to say how many years, but it's been a lot, both in property management and in facilities management. And I look forward to talking about some of the things we've all learned over this past couple of years and what we think we might need to learn going forward. So thanks for the invite, guys.
Awesome. And last but not least, our host, Randy Burke.
Yeah, Benjamin, thank you. And Benjamin, again, thank you so much for your moderating, unmatched. So, and thank you to the panel. Thank you to the panel. Very distinguished. So yeah, Randy Burke, CEO, DCS Global, international cleaning consultants based in Canada. And been at it far too long, but anyways, very happy to be putting this panel on, and going to hear some great stuff. Thank you.
Thanks, Randy, and thanks for the compliment too. I'll do my best to keep you guys from getting out of control. The moderating influence. So the theme for today, as you guys have seen, is property management R.O.C.K.S. R.O.C.K.S being an acronym for risks, opportunities, challenges, knowledge, and strategy. And certainly those 5 words certainly apply to the last couple of years. In particular, and no doubt, I think it's fair to say to the next couple of years too. So that's sort of the focus of what we're looking at today. And we're going to begin with a kind of a situation analysis. And I'll turn to Matt. Matt mentioned already that, the perspective that you bring, Matt, is the sort of financial analyst perspective as to what's going on in the dollars and cents. And so, Matt, I'll just put it to you to open up our conversation. We're all talking about, return to normal. No one knows what that even means. Hybrid in office, et cetera, et cetera. What is the right balance of returning to normal?
Yeah, that's a good question. And just for some background, again, we started this pandemic, at least from a financial perspective, I think in the early days, wondering if companies were going to have enough liquidity to survive through the next few months, what mortgage maturities looked like. So we've come a long way, that we're now talking more on the operations front to see ultimately where occupancy will go. And the focus here, I think, is more on office and retail. So those have been two asset classes that I think from our perspective are a little bit more challenging to predict. And that's what our business ultimately is predicting kind of where these companies will go from an earnings standpoint. And that clearly funnels down to what they can do on the property management front, because you need cash flows to ultimately justify raising capital and continuing this business. It's an investment business at the end of the day. So we're at a point where, I mean, in terms of a return to normal, I think there's a view that hybrid is here to stay to some extent on the office front. What that ultimately looks like, I don't think we'll fully know until maybe mid next year, although there is an aspect of the pandemic that is still lingering. I mean, today we're looking at cases spike in Europe. From a Canadian perspective, Quebec just put out their highest numbers, and I was in Montreal yesterday marketing. So we'll see how things go from that front, but I do think we're seeing people slowly come back to the office, definitely at National Bank. I mean, even today I spoke with my boss who's talking about bringing people back at least 3 days a week, because we've seen an issue with new employees and just integrating them. But I think as we try to do hybrid, there will ultimately be an inclination to head in the direction of returning, just because hybrid is very challenging. I think we've seen it. It's easier to either be all in person or all virtual, and I think the tendency is to go back to in person. So that's kind of our base case. Office, the leasing side has remained pretty strong. We have even seen, again, we cover not entirely a bit of a different group. Allied owns more brick and beam, older stock that's been converted. It caters to a tech tenant base. And then Dream, which again does have a bit more downtown assets, but we're not talking high rise, more focused on commuter base. It tends to cater to people that live and work in the same place. And that stuff has held up pretty well from a leasing standpoint. And we'd expect that it continues to do so. I mean, Allied's Toronto numbers were quite solid on that front. They actually saw occupancy increase. And again, it doesn't mean that people are necessarily in the offices today. I think it's just businesses are making leasing decisions, and these decisions are 10, 15, 20, I mean, in some cases, 30-year decisions. So they're not making them entirely in the context of the pandemic, thinking that we're going to be in a pandemic for the next 30 years. They're thinking about what is their employee base going to look like over a period of time, and where will they be. I think, again, the base case scenario at this point is that they will at least use the office for a period of time. And again, footprint changes. I think there was already a move towards less square footage per person in the office segment, and that will continue, and concepts around hoteling will likely continue. But regardless of whether you're in the office 3 days a week or 5 days a week, the idea is that you still need a presence, and you still need square footage per person. So our inclination is to believe that companies will kind of keep their footprint as they have during the pandemic. The ones that gave up space or put it up on the sublet market, I think there was a very clear distinction there, especially in Toronto. It was CIBC, because they were moving to their brand new shiny building and needed to give up space, and would have given it up pandemic or not. And that was a lot of Toronto's vacancy, to be clear. And then it was businesses that felt the pandemic directly in terms of what they were ultimately experiencing. It was media companies that didn't have advertisers, or travel companies that didn't have a business. And they were the ones that said, you know what, well, we can try virtual. At least we have that as a potential offset, and we'll give up our space. But that has largely stabilized. The sublet space, if anything, is being pulled back to some extent by users that are saying, hey, we may need this office in the future. We didn't think, but it's crucial to our brand, etc. So we are seeing that start to happen, and our base case is kind of that we won't know distinctly where office goes for a few years, but the early indications are that businesses find it to be crucial. And then a Canadian context here, I mean, this is about Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, big cities. The demographics in this country continue to be exceptionally strong. We have a government that is pro-immigration and pro-jobs, and historically there was a direct correlation between jobs growth and office space. Whether or not that relationship will continue to be the same ratio, that remains to be determined. But at the very least, we expect that the Canadian employee base will continue to grow, and it's mostly economic immigrants that are coming in. So most of those would be office workers at the end of the day. So our expectation is that there will still be strong demographic support for Canadian office markets. This is all obviously excluding Calgary, which vastly oversupplied their market and has its own unique challenges and will likely have those challenges for several decades to come. I mean, it's an office market that built enough square footage. I think it has the same downtown office square footage as Montreal, a city that has 3 times the population. So puts it in perspective what they were thinking growth wise, and that's when you can get ahead of yourself. Toronto is supplying a fair bit of new space. But again, given historic absorption rates, we'd expect that space can be taken up by tenants, and that it will, and that vacancy should hover around the 10% range, which in a North American context is a pretty good number. I mean, all things considered, you've seen San Francisco, New York, et cetera, move in the opposite direction. So I don't know, I'll leave it if you have another follow-up question. That was pretty lengthy.
No, that was a fantastic, I mean, comprehensive answer. Before we move on to the next question, does anybody want to respond to Matt?
You know what, Matt, you've taken away some of the stats that I was going to use, but it's okay because I still have other ones.
Cool. No, that was a very, very solid, comprehensive intro to our discussion. So thank you, Matt. Well, Elizabeth, let's turn to you in that case for the next question. And here we're looking more from a sort of property management perspective. Elizabeth, where are we now? What have we learned in the past year that will help us face the challenges of 2022 and beyond?
You know what, Matt really set us up great there with some really good statistics. And I'm going to say right now, it's not all bad news. I mean, people like to think that the office, there's all this bad news in the office world and in the property management world. And it's not. We're also, anyone who's driven into Toronto lately knows everybody and their mother has bought a car and they're all on the Don Valley Parkway at the same time, which I can attest to. But some of the things we've learned in the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic, and first off, shout out to Wendy Waters, who's our Vice President of Research here at GWL Realty Advisors. And she gave me all these stats, so I'm not that smart. She fed me all this. So she fed me this one that I thought was really interesting. A KPMG survey of CEOs in August of 2020, 69% of them felt they were going to downsize their real estate footprint, but now only 17% do. So, you know, there's a lot of faith in the office market and what it's going to look like. Office jobs in Toronto have been growing faster than non-office jobs, even through the pandemic. They've grown in the last 2 years. They've still grown 5%. So that's all good news. The other good news that I thought was really interesting in all of this is that most companies spend, office space is cheap compared to talent cost. 80 to 85% of the company's costs are towards your talent. Only 5% is towards their office space. So it's our job as property managers and our teams to say, okay, how do we make that office space as attractive as possible to get people back to the office? That's our job. And if what we've learned is through the pandemic is, you know, there's a scarcity of good talent out there. And one of the things that is going to contribute to getting people back to the office is making it appealing to people to come back to the office. All about amenities and programs and experiences for people. You know, speaking of amenities, that's become probably the number one watchword in property management over the pandemic. It's all about how do we get people to latch on to coming back into the office. We have to make it more interesting for them and more appealing to them than sitting at home working in their shorts, or in my case, in their yoga pants. So you have to, real pants are not as comfortable, let's be honest. So, yeah, I mean, but we have to think about, okay, what is going to get people to put on their real pants and come back to the office? So we spend a lot of time in property management talking about things like that. People want more outdoor spaces, like duh, it's a pandemic, and we want that fresh air, but not every office building has that built in. We're looking at, you know, putting in rooftop patios in some of our buildings, or opening up space that people can get, tenants can use that as tenant space to use with their friends, their coworkers, and have kind of open windows in the front rather than carving that off from the rest of the building. But we have to have these things that appeal to people coming out of this pandemic, and hopefully we're in an endemic soon, because I totally agree with Matt. My group runs buildings, so we're coming back in now. Most of my teams are in now. We're spelling off each other, but that's going to change real soon. Most of us are double vaxxed. It's time to get back to the office, but let's talk about what makes that experience better than them sitting at home. And one of the final things I'll talk about, well, two things. The first one is communications. If we have learned nothing else through this pandemic, it's how to communicate with our tenants, because as anyone who's been in property management knows, when you communicate with your tenants, you're only communicating to that one tenant contact that's listed on that sheet. And do they pass that on to the other people that they work with in that office? We don't know. So we have to get a lot more creative about how we communicate with our tenants. That's a big one. They want to know, how clean is the building? What are we doing in terms of air quality? When's the last time you changed your filters? Are you applying ASHRAE 62.1? And God knows I've practically memorized 62.1 by now. But our tenants have too. So they need to understand, okay, landlord, do you get it? Do you get what my employees are asking for? When it comes to the indoor air quality, cleaning and sanitization, our Senior Director of Technical Services, shout out to R.O.C.K.S, he has spent an inordinate amount of time figuring out what's the best thing to do for our buildings. How do we meet ASHRAE 62.1? How do we exceed that standard? What are the best things to do? And how do we do that in a way that's still cost effective for our buildings? Because, you know, nobody wants to bear the cost of excessive CAM charges based on any kind of upgrade that we may have had to do. The other big one is, of course, cleaning. Like, that's probably the number one question we get asked is, what are you doing about the cleaning? One of the things Randy and I talk about occasionally is we rely so much on our cleaning partners. Hallmark is our cleaning partner downtown, and they have been fantastic in helping us make sure the right people are in place, make sure the right systems are in place. But it would be great if there were some kind of an industry organization that allowed us to speak as one voice for that group, and to say, hey, okay, the cleaners as a whole are getting together, those companies are getting together, and here's a standard that we want to go through with landlord. What do you think about this? That would be awesome. And then the last thing is all the certifications out there. It's almost certification overload at this point. There's Fitwell, there is, of course, BOMA Benjamin. I would not mention that. But what do we need to be doing? What is resonating with our tenants? If we get all of these certifications, is that what we need to do? Do we need to pick and choose which one's the most important? Which ones do our tenants like? So those are the kinds of things we grapple with right now as property managers. And I think that if nothing else, we have learned to work very closer with our partner suppliers like Hallmark, like our security companies, to partner. It's always been a partnership for us, but it's more important now that everybody is on the same page and we're always working towards the same thing, and that our tenants understand what we're doing, because there is a ton of effort that's going into this. And sometimes we forget to talk about how much work we've already done. So I will leave it there for now, Benjamin.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'll open it up to the group, but I can't help but jump in and tie together your last 2 points about certifications and cleaning, because we actually have in pilot right now a new program called BOMA Best Clean Companies. And you'll be happy to know that the word companies is important. So it's not another certification for you, Elizabeth, and your colleagues like Letitia and others, but it's a certification of the cleaning companies based on feedback from the commercial real estate industry to establish benchmarks and standards so that you know what you're getting when you go to RFP and so forth.
Is awesome, Benjamin. And I didn't spoon feed you that one, but I think I think that is a great indicator of where those companies all work together to establish a standard for us. That I think that's a phenomenal idea. I look forward to seeing that happen.
For sure, it's in pilot right now. I couldn't help but do that. Anybody else want to respond to Elizabeth's many points?
I want to lean in on like the tenant engagement, because for many years from a property management, it's all been about tenant engagement, and now we've pivoted to it's like the extension to employee engagement, because we have to engage not only in the tenants' employees, our own employees, to come back. So it's really driving the use and expanding that tenant engagement framework. So it's going to be really interesting to see how people look at that from a creative perspective and what works and what not, and really being able to share the wins and the losses. Some things we're going to do are not going to work, and others. And I do want to, also acknowledge from a property management standpoint, and it's something that, we talk so much about this hybrid and people working remote and coming back. And I think the acknowledgement, and I did make this on the last panel, is our properties actually can't look after themselves. So, a huge kudos to the property management team, across Canada that has turned up to manage the properties on behalf of their employers and behalf of the owners. And I think that acknowledgement needs to be continually put in the space, because there's so many people that have had to turn up, they can't work remote, to look after the properties while they're empty. And also in a multifamily space while they're more full. So, so I just wanted to acknowledge that and put it in the space. Thank you.
Very important point, Letitia. Couldn't agree with you more. We have seen the same thing. Our multifamily is ridiculously crowded, and commercial is not. But that doesn't mean the buildings don't go on. Doesn't mean that their maintenance isn't required. So yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Our teams have been, as have all the property management teams in all the different companies. They're all out there doing the same thing, and they're working hard. And we do need to acknowledge, particularly those building operators that are out there, that sometimes are, it's all great until something goes bump in the night. But these people are the ones who are the ones keeping our buildings running for us. So well said, Letitia.
Yeah. I was going to jump in, and Elizabeth, you really did hit a nerve. I've had contractors calling me quite a bit. We deal with them all the time. And, it's really now about the industry pulling itself together and getting best practices and how they're going to serve, property management, frankly, during, and not just property management, clean all different types of buildings during this pandemic. Just some history. In April 2020, the top 5 U.S. companies, huge guys, billion-dollar companies, formed the Cleaning Coalition of America in response to, of course, the pandemic. And they put in some money, and they really did come up with something. And shout out to BOMA Canada for sure. As a result to, the Janitorial Needs Assessment Committee, property managers say, yeah, we need some certification, and that's great. But I think it's one step further. Like, what are the best practices really from, a cleaning point of view, from a communication point of view, from cleaners, technology? It's a multifaceted industry. So, how can that actually come together in a new model that, the industry can speak, the contractors themselves, because they wrestle with it every day. And right now they are islands. They really are. And bit of history, in 2016, the Contract Cleaners Association here, the Canadian one, wrote a handbook, a best practices handbook in 2016. Top 7 contractors were on the committee with 4 property management groups, and we chaired the committee. And literally, to quote, it was to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of building service contractors and their relationships with building owners by the standardization of terms, concepts, and guidelines. Then they did it because the race to zero, as we said, the contractors were eating their young. They were underbidding each other so badly that there had to be some kind of standards around labor, productivity, and all that. And it worked. It really, I think, the industry got together. Right now, the British Columbia Contract Cleaners Association is restarting. They've got a runaway labor costs, and they've got provincial legislation that isn't working. So I would suggest, it's time for, and again, I've got contractors calling me, time for a bit of a rewrite. What is the best practices from the actual cleaning industry? And then I think that can complement a contract, a certification program, and they are different. So anyways, yeah, that's excellent. And I just thought I'd chime in on that. So yeah, we'd be happy to volunteer to chair that. It helps us, we get clarity. And so thank you, Benjamin.
No, for sure. And Randy, you played a true leadership role in the BOMA Canada initiative coming out of the pandemic 20 odd months ago, and lots of amazing work came there. So I should salute you as well. I think we're going to go now to I should have mentioned this off the top. My apologies. The first of 2 polling questions. We're going to live poll the audience. And Melanie, if you could please, oh, there we go. So this is a building ops focused questionnaire. And the question, as you can see in front of you, is what is your top risk in building operations as we reach 2022? And the choices are labor shortages, low tenant reoccupancy, cleaning program efficiency, or other. And I'm being forced to answer myself, so I'm going to answer one of them. We'll just give people another few seconds, and I assume that the results will become available to us. And then we'll move on to the next topic. And as we're waiting for the results to come in, just a reminder to the audience that you can submit questions. We've had lots of thought-provoking content from our speakers today. So do make use of the chat and put your questions there. Melanie, maybe the answers to the poll come at the end. I'm not sure we can clarify this in advance. So unless I see them in a second, we might, oh, there we go. Okay. So the results, as you may be able to see on your screen, 39% of our participants say labor shortages and costs is the top risk. 33% say low tenant reoccupancy, and a little bit less, 24% say cleaning program efficiency, with a teeny bit doing others. So kind of almost not a huge disparity in those 3 answers. And I'm just going to close it up. Letitia, that takes us to you. We've been talking about property management. We've talked about building ops. Let's go back to property management with you, and focusing now on the risks and challenges. So what are the current and pending risks and challenges in property management that you see leading into next year?
Well, I mean, when I look at it high level and you kind of drill down into all of them, they tend to interplay with each other. But leveraging off the answer that we just got, human capital. It is an employee market. There is a huge lack of talent out there. And then, as we all know, we're all creating EDI initiatives and strategies. How do we achieve those strategies given what's happening in our talent pool? So then that translates within the business to increased human capital costs. Then you kind of go down the thread a bit and you go, okay, well, that creates downward pressure on fees. There was downward pressure on fees that have resulted from the COVID impact of rental rates for office and retail particularly. And you have this strategic business dilemma. So how, as a leadership team, are we supposed to create a strategic plan that models growth when our margins are being squeezed? And then you layer on what I think COVID has really polarized, is that owners and clients need a higher performance team to manage their properties. But how do you provide this when your key fundamentals are working against you? And so when I wrap all this up, I constantly am thinking about this and how you manage through this period and how to get creative. I don't have the answers, I can tell you that, but this is definitely an area of the business where, it's leaning in to hear how everybody else is addressing this. And so then it speaks to, another challenge, which results in an answer from this. Well, we're going to use technology. But how do we keep up with technology when it's coming to us at such a rapid pace? Keeping up, selecting it, implementing on our buildings and managing it going forward. So, within our organization, there's this whole other business unit that's been having to be created to manage this, which compounds your human capital problem. And then if you look at the buildings and you look at technology, cybersecurity. So every time we add a piece of technology to the business, to a building, how do we manage, cybersecurity when cyber fraud has now become a business? It's a business, and it's no matter of, is it going to happen? It's a question of when and how we respond. So how do you have in-house management? How do you create that team to execute? How do you have an external strategic partner that supports you? And then how do you make sure you've got the right insurance in a very tight insurance market? So, I would say this is what, when I look at the risks and challenges, it keeps me up at night, really focusing on trying to leverage on my relationships and saying, hey, what are you doing? How do we manage through this? But I don't have the answers. And, I think I've just downloaded a lot, and you could drill into all of these different these components, but think about how they interplay between each other. There's actually a whole new area of roles within the property management business that are being created: cyber and technology.
Wow.
And how do we attract that talent pool to the real estate market? I don't know. I don't know the answers, and I'd love to hear if anyone on this call has, the same problems, or if they've got any ideas on how to get creative here.
Yeah, you know what, Letitia, I couldn't agree more with you. It's something we struggle with in terms of everybody loves to talk. If I hear about the hybrid model one more time, everybody talks about the hybrid model. That doesn't really apply to property management, because yes, we've had to allow people to work from home during the pandemic for public safety, for their safety, we had to allow that. But now people are getting vaccinated. The majority are vaccinated. It's time to come back to the office, and people are still struggling with, but wait a minute, I kind of like being in my yoga pants. So, but we run buildings. So, there is a struggle there of people saying, well, wait a minute, I can go out there and start shopping around, because it is an employee's market out there. And they can start, they can shop around, and maybe there's a company. I can't imagine too many landlords have property management teams that are going to be fully remote. I don't know how that works. I don't think it can. But I agree that we have to get more creative in how we engage, not just our tenants to come back to our buildings, but our employees to come back to our buildings.
We want to keep these roles there. We want to employ Canadians. So, you got to get people back into the offices. Otherwise, the only solution, is IA. And, we don't want to go down that road. I want to take jobs away from our Canadian individuals, but we've got to find solutions. And, applying IA to a building, it's a lower cost when we roll that out. But, I like to have the people connectivity. I personally, in the building that we manage, and I know all my building operators, I know all the security, like I interact with them daily. I see how they're going. I would miss that. I like that.
Matt, did you want to get in? I saw you came off mute.
No, sorry, I'm actually in the office, so it's a bit weird to do this because our walls are pretty thin. That was never thought of, and I didn't want the background noise to bother you guys while I'm doing this.
That's okay, Matt. It's
this whole
usually my dog.
discussion is very interesting from my standpoint, because I don't, as a financial analyst, spend too much time drilling down into the cost side of things, because a lot of these are recovered from tenants. So the revenue goes up and down. All I care about is what NOI is. And that, from an owner's standpoint, is kind of our focus and how we value this. But at the same time, when it comes to leasing with these tenants and the costs that you are ultimately recovering from them, that becomes an issue that is discussed, and it can impact my net rents if the tenants don't get the service they want or are being charged too much for it. So it's a fascinating discussion.
And I'd like to lean in, Ben, because as somebody who's run a property management business and helped create one in a prior life, and now here, there's always this concept of, wow, it's a recoverable expense. Well, I'm sorry, when you look at your recovery expenses versus your net rent, there's a gross rent. And if you can drive those down, you can increase your bottom line. So it's all about how do you get the net rent up by controlling those costs. But I actually, most of the people that have worked with me for a long time know that they can never say, well, it's a recoverable cost, because I will eat them alive.
Yeah, but that's 100% true. Just because something's a recoverable cost, it doesn't matter. You're competing with the guy across the street who may be more efficient in their recoverable costs than you are. And one of the things I think my team is tired of hearing me say this, but you have to think of these buildings as this is your real estate. You have to take this personally.
Yes.
You have to constantly be looking at, how do we make this better? How do we do this faster, stronger, smarter all the time? Because our recoverable costs have to be competitive. And it's one thing to be competitive across the street, but when you've got a big bank client or someone like that, not picking on you, Matt, but when you have a big bank client who says, hey, your recoverable costs are this in Toronto, they're this in Calgary, they're this in Vancouver, there is some regional disparity to that for sure. But as a company, we have to focus on how do we make our real estate competitive everywhere? How do we get consistency everywhere? And, it's our cleaners that help us with that. It's our security people that help us with that. And our building operators help us with that.
I'm sitting here twitching on my seat because I do, and you guys are nailing it big time. I mean, the compression between, rental rates and costs and all that, and cleaning is a big number. It's a big number. And so, when we deal with this all the time and trying to get best value and make sure it's working well, at the same time, manage or reduce costs. And I mean, the key is to keep your contractor whole, believe it or not, and what it comes down to is their margin dollars. It's not so much the top line. It's that, they've got to cover their overhead, they've got to cover their and key people. So there's a nut, so to speak, in terms of what they need to get out of it. And then they can afford to give back some labor on the hybrid model because, they're not cleaning some space. And so now with technology, and I know we're getting into some pilots here, and Elizabeth being one of them, is, so sensing, where are people actually at? Where are they working? And so where do you not have to go? And so if you can cut a little bit of labor there while keeping your contractor whole, now you're talking a controllable expense that in fact doesn't hurt anybody. And so there's a real win around technology and what I would call cleaning on demand, which a model is now emerging. And this is something I'm really interested in working closer with the contractors on because we are working with clients. Anyway, so it's a big number of cleaning.
Randy, I'm gonna jump in. Okay, one last word to Elizabeth on this point here.
Real quick, I promise. It has never been in anyone's good interest to drive our suppliers down to the lowest common denominator. It never is in anyone's interest. We don't get great service, they get hurt. How does it help us as a landlord to hurt our suppliers? And coming from the facilities management point of view, been there, done that, it's not pretty and it doesn't help anybody. So totally agree with Randy. We have to work with the suppliers to make sure everybody's kept whole.
I'm going to cut it there, but it's a great place to leave it for the moment. We'll come back to this, I'm sure. I see there are a handful of questions coming in, and people are using both the chat and the Q&A function, so I'm seeing both streams. But Melanie, let's go to the next, the second of two polling questions, and that is, what is the top opportunity in building operations for 2022? Last time was the risk, and the choices this time are customizing tenant occupancy needs, creating flexible on-demand cleaning programs, or optimizing costs, or other. And we can all go in there and submit our answers, and there'll be a poll results available in a second. And in the meantime, while you're already typing, you can put your questions into the streams if we have a few minutes at the end here. So once the results are in a few seconds, Randy, I'll turn to you and ask you the next question, and that'll be on the opportunities and strategies part of today's discussion. But Melanie, why don't we cut it or call it or whatever the word is, and let's see what the results are from the poll. Wow, so almost half of the people say customizing tenant occupancy needs, 43% is the biggest opportunity for next year. Creating flexible on-demand cleaning, 30%. Optimizing costs, 18%, and then other has doubled from the last time, more than doubled to 9%. So there you go. So Randy, turning to you for our last of the sort of key discussion questions. I'll go straight at it. What are the opportunities that lie ahead within our industry that we should be seizing?
Yeah, and you know, it really, in my mind, is on two things: tenants and cost. And what can you do for your tenants that's going to make them feel clean and safe? That's going to, you know, give them the flexibility in their occupancy and their movements that are going to fit them. And I think the more that happens, obviously trust builds, and you end up, you know, getting tenants that are comfortable, and more come back. So, you know, between communication built around that, you know, we use a ton of little communication tools, door hangers, you know, tent cards, you know, online messaging, anything that you know that is quick and to the point, that is going to, again, have them feel comfortable and safe. I think that's something that really needs focus. You know, paying attention to the macro issues, you know, supply chain, labor shortages. I mean, these are issues. So in a way too, it's a competitive environment. So, you know, how can each one of us make sure that we're best suited to handle, again, you know, taking care of our own employees, hiring right, making sure that we have stock in hand so that you're not going to get stuck with supply chain. So those macro issues, I think, are going to be important to watch, and, you know, that they're challenges, but in a way they create opportunities. So I fully believe that, and what we're finding is that the more data that you can give in that messaging, you're going to get trust. Because typically there's this landlord, you know, tenant, call it what you will, relationship that sometimes gets strained, other times it's great. So getting some data around, you know, how things are better, and in our side, it's hygiene testing for showing that it is in fact clean, and third-party testing which shows sanitization levels are there. Great, you know, it's in people's psyche these days that in fact, you know, boy oh boy, how many hand sanitizers can you use? It goes on and on. And certainly, I touched on this already, but managing spend. You know, the revenue side is compressed. It's tough. So how can you manage spend? You know, certainly, as I already mentioned, in cleaning, but any other items that are there, great. And I would also say there's a real opportunity in improving the governance, ESG. Certainly the you know, the environmental side, if it's hygienic, it's okay, that's the environment, great, get that nailed down. Make sure you're green, because a lot of these hospital chemicals are iffy. You don't need them. You know, COVID's easy to clean. But the governance, social responsibility, yeah, you know, there's a real challenge right now, and with how I'll talk about my industry, cleaners are paid. It's still pretty sketchy at times, and you know, there's some reputational risk there. Every once in a while, out comes one of these ugly stories of, you know, somebody who's basically a slave. It's so, you know, managing that, making sure people are paid fairly through some sort of format, auditing, such whatever it takes, and then governance, making sure the contract models are solid and you're not going to get caught. So I think, you know, I think those are some of the bigger opportunities that are out there. Challenging environment for sure, but the Chinese curse, right? It's a challenge and an opportunity at the same time. So that's what I start with.
Anybody want to respond?
I just quickly say ESG is obviously very important from an investment standpoint at this point, and it's definitely increasing. Measuring it is the harder part for us as financial analysts, but I think there are starting to be financial metrics or metrics that people are putting in their public disclosure in terms of getting at that. So I think it will be a growing sort of owner thing that would be pushed down on the property management side of the business. And then the second part, I mean, again, I noted that vacancy has been fairly, it hasn't been a huge issue in Canada. But that is where I start to see the op costs, is when you have vacant space and you're still doing cleaning, etc. And that has a big impact on our numbers, because 1% vacancy can be 2% of NOI for us, because it's a lot of fixed costs in the business. So that's where I think if vacancy does trend up, there could be more focus on the cost side of things on the property management aspect.
Interesting. Cool. I can't help but say that I think tomorrow we have another meeting of a BOMA Canada Commercial Real Estate and Human Rights Committee, and it touches on what Randy just said before. So look for that next year. Human rights concerns is moving into the business world in a new way, in a fresh and important way. It's been an issue in the mining sector and other sectors for a long time. But Randy, you mentioned modern slavery, and things like that are going to become a concern for our industry. Good in some ways and not so good in other ways. Yeah. Why don't I start to move into the open questions here? And there's another one that just came in, but I thought I might begin with a question tying together a few of the themes that we heard before. Elizabeth, you were joking that people like to work in their yoga pants at home, but I want to take that and put a question back to you guys. Do you think there will be a cultural difference in commercial buildings going forward because of what you might call the yoga pants effect? I mean, there was a time when at the corner of Bay and King in Toronto, or equivalent corners in other cities, you would only see men, and it was overwhelmingly men back then, in suits and ties, and then women would come into the workforce and wear equivalent dress. Our office for BOMA Canada is at Yonge and Dundas. Different feeling altogether than at Bay and King, let's say, or some equivalent corner in another city. Do you think there'll be a different feeling in offices going back as a result of all of us working from home with the Zoom shirt and the yoga pants? And are there spin-offs in terms of the at-grade retail, let's say, in terms of the kinds of things that they're going to be selling to returning office denizens? Who wants to go with that?
Well, let me chime in real quick. Everybody talks about the COVID-15. And I don't know how many people out there have been feeling that one, but I think that there is going to be a little bit of. I have talked to a few people who have not been back in the office since March of 20. Like, that to me is just wow. So yeah, like, you got to fit back into those pants now. So let's start thinking about that. I think I don't know, Benjamin, that's a huge concern, because I think most offices, even pre-COVID, were saying, our office certainly was, that they were saying, look, unless you have a meeting with a client or a tenant, come in business casual, acceptable business casual, but you don't need to worry about wearing that suit and tie or equivalent dress for women every day, because it's not required anymore. I think there are some firms out there that are very specifically saying that's never going to be good for us. We're always going to be sort of more business formal dress. But I think it was already headed that way pre-COVID. I don't think there's any real, I hope to God we don't see yoga pants in the office anytime soon. It might be just a little too casual, but hey, there are lots of offices where that's okay. There's lots of creative offices where that's okay. And it's whatever the tenant works for them.
I will add to that. I mean, I spent a lot of time in the office when there was like 2 or 3 people in the office, and I wore very casual clothes. I wore what I wanted to wear when I woke up in the morning, and I wondered what it was going to look like when we came back. And when we came back to the office, I can say that people were wearing the same things as when we left. That, people didn't want to buy new clothes. I think they're actually happy to get out of their sweats. And so, unfortunately for me, I was like, "Ooh, I wonder whether I keep coming in casual." And I'm like, "Oh no, I gotta go back to normal." I said, "Okay, I'm going to start to wear it." I think what's going to drive that is culture. Like, if we start to change culture and how we connect and employee and tenant engagement, that's where you're going to see a change in how we're taught. But I have today, like I there's a lot of people, they were in the same clothes.
I was thinking one of the things I see as culture changes is kind of like the tech industry, people working when they want to, and sort of later, or I'm an early morning person or whatever. And we're seeing that now. And again, from a service point of view, it's a bit of a challenge because we're typically, the cleaners are in there 5 till 11 or whatever, and then it's done. So I think there's going to be a lot more blending of service personnel and tenants. And I think that's where you're going to really need to make sure that the service people are your frontline ambassadors. And I think there's going to be a push on customer service, frankly, in terms of how you're interacting with people. You got to be ready with a safety concern. You got to be ready, where's the washroom? I don't really work here off, all that stuff. And I think the customer service piece is going to be a big piece for anybody who's on the front line.
I was just going to quickly add, I think one area where it is going to be increasingly difficult is in the path, and I just bought the shirt today because I needed to dress up for this, so I supported the path, but is if it's a 3-day versus, I think before the pandemic, on average, people came in 4 days a week. For the food courts, that does present a problem because those are businesses that need to judge your inventory, et cetera, and they're paying high rents per square footage. And it's really hard, like I will say day to day, this city looks completely different. One day there's tons of people waiting in line at the food court. Monday and Friday, it's way less traffic. And we haven't seen the commuter come back in a big way at this point, at least not on public transit. So those were huge amounts of people using services in the base of these buildings. And I think absolutely if there's flexibility going forward, that could be impacted, whether it's timing in terms of when people come in and leave, or if it's they're spending Monday and Friday at home because they're extending their long weekends. That takes a day away from buying food at the food court, right? So it'll be interesting to watch how that plays out, but it would have a direct impact probably on cleaning, et cetera, right? So.
Great points, guys. I'm going to put one last question to you and then ask you to give a word of wisdom to wrap us up. We'll go a speed round. This is a question from Rob, who writes, I don't hear a lot of discussion on the street about capital planning. Has building capital execution gone on pause temporarily in some asset classes while pandemic uncertainty around long-term occupancy is becoming clearer? Who wants to respond to that?
Yeah, I saw that question from Rob. Hi, Rob. I think that in where we could, in our case, in the case of Realty Advisors, where we could escalate the capital spend in order to get visible work done before people start coming back. 33 Young's a great example. We are doing so much work in the garage right now, but it is going to look fantabulous when people come back. Mm-hmm. So if you were able to do that sort of thing, yeah, but there are some assets where we have to Rob's point, we have had to cut back a little bit and say, you know what, we need to rethink what the plan looks like here. But, we tend to be long-term hold. So we still want those assets to perform in the long term. And to do that, you need to spend money. And what better time to spend money than right now when people aren't back? The sad part is we do have some major projects starting just as we know people are going to start coming back next year. And there's nothing you can do about that. That's just timing. What worries me more, frankly, right now is the supply chain, because that is absolutely, bar none, my biggest concern right now in getting capital done.
And the supply chain has been, just to tie it together to ESG, the supply chain has been disrupted significantly, momentarily, because of those massive floods in BC. Yeah. There's nothing going from the Port of Vancouver or the West Coast ports right now, with highways and railroads washed out. Who wants to have at it next?
I mean, from a financial standpoint, obviously, we like when CapEx isn't spent when there's uncertainty around the leasing side of things. So I think there is probably a little bit more scrutiny on CapEx being spent at this point, just given the outlook on where office could go. That said, the companies that I deal with are different life cycles in their business. So the ones that were in the process, I think, are continuing on those major projects, downtown Toronto. But I think in terms of new development, new building, et cetera, there has definitely been some pause put on things just until there's more certainty on the leasing side. Thanks.
Interesting. Great. Well, so guys, we're at our last 3 minutes or so. So why don't I go to you in the order that we started off the questions. So Matt, I'll go to you first. What one nugget or takeaway do you want to leave with the audience today, having presented such a comprehensive overview at the beginning, but having heard your co-panelists as well over the last hour?
Yeah, no, I appreciate all of your commentary. It has definitely made me think more about the property management side of the business. Again, we get one line item and that's all you guys contribute to the financial statements for me. But this has given me a much deeper perspective in terms of what goes into the business, and that it is actually something that I should be paying more attention to going forward, because it is crucial to ultimately how the tenants perceive you. And it's their bottom line at the end of the day. I work in a one-year business in a sector that is a multi-decade business, and my investors are very much fluid in terms of playing asset classes and don't like multiple types of risk. So they tend to go with the flow, but I'm generally bullish on office. I'm bullish on the downtown. I think we'll be back, and I hope we'll be back. So thanks, everybody. This was very fascinating.
It's a great positive place to leave it. The next person who answered was Elizabeth. So over to you, Elizabeth.
Well, hey, if I can walk away from this saying that I got someone on the investment side to think about property management, my work here is done. Yay! I think that to echo what Letitia said earlier on, we can't thank our suppliers and our building staff enough. We get through these things because we have good teams in our buildings. Our buildings are effective and our tenants are happy because we have good teams in our buildings. And those teams include the property management teams that work for Realty Advisors, as well as our suppliers. So big thank you to all of those folks for keeping our buildings running and for being partners with us.
Awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth. Letitia.
I think I'd want to lean on where I identified lots of risks and challenges. And, in a lot of instances, we tend to try to not talk about those because we see them as other weaknesses. But I think that we're all facing them. And if we can get over feeling them as a threat or not wanting to share those, and we start to talk about them more, I think we can find creative solutions. So I would encourage openness and discussing about those risks and challenges, and how can we look at them from a creative side to create solutions as an industry. Because we're thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Letitia. I apologize. Okay, Randy, take us home.
Yeah, sure. Just two quick things. Implement a Cleaning for Health program. You can do touch point sanitization and hygienic without increasing costs, and get some audits done. And do a portfolio-wide cleaning plan. It's too important to go building by building. But again, wonderful panel. Thank you so much.
And as you were speaking, Randy, I saw my clock go from 2:59 to 3 o'clock. So perfect timing, guys. Thank you very much. Thanks to our audience for the great questions and comments. And thanks to you, Randy, for putting this together, and your team at DCS.
That was lovely. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.